Hello and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel. And I am very excited to say that my guest today is Naomi Martin. And the subject is the seven tribes of wealth, which is actually based on a talk that Naomi is giving for the Astrological Lodge of London on the 13th of October at 7 o'clock. So welcome, Naomi.
Thank you, Anna. It's really lovely to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, it's a pleasure, and it's a very intriguing topic. Tell us more.
Okay, actually, can I just say that it's actually the eight different types of wealth.
Oh, eight.
Yeah, it's because it's based on the Hindu Ashtalakshmis. There's a goddess of just bounty, not so much wealth, but she's of just a old like macro umbrella of wealth, and there's eight different types of wealth. And I was looking at it more in depth because sometimes it seems very esoteric, right? When you hear something like that, you go, oh, that's nice. It's very conceptual, but it doesn't actually like feel, you know what I mean, in the real world. And as you know, many astrologers do, whether it's on a professional or amateur basis, when you do charts, and obviously most astrologers will know that the two main questions are always involving money, right? Wealth of something, whether it's a job or, a house issue or, whatever, or it's love. So regardless of the quote unquote myriad of problems, that it's going to be one of two when you get a client or you do a reading, even if it's a free complimentary reading for a friend, what have you. And I was looking at it in the prism because over the years, when you do readings and you analyze people's charts, when you say, oh, are they wealthy? It seems like it's sometimes meaningless because there's so many different types of wealth, right? So, for instance, we know where the lodge is located. It's in London, and it's in central London. And of course, being in a big, city, which is sort of globalized everywhere else, you get quote unquote the wealthy person, but they're not exactly the same tribe, So when, for instance, I don't know, let's just say there's like a Marxist revolution, you go, oh, they're rich, but actually they're actually, it's almost like saying you're English or you're British, right? Yeah, but where are you, a Northerner, Southerner? Are you Scottish? Are you Welsh? It almost seems like that. We live in England, and of course we have the royal family, and it's one of the first things that pop up into mind, right? Was the royal family as sort of the epitome of like old money and wealth. But actually it's interesting because if you look at the royal family, and for instance, like Queen Elizabeth's chart, past, they have a lot of wealth, but there's no agency. Does that make sense? So even though they have all this wealth, and they do have wealth, and I'm not saying that, they're eating, well, actually, sometimes they have been known to eat, especially the past queen, be very frugal in her breakfast, right? Do you remember I think it was about 20 years ago, there was a Sun expose about what the queen and Prince Philip had for breakfast, and it was Tupperware and cereals. I don't know if you remember that.
Vaguely.
Yeah. But I mean, she was known not to be so sort of, extemporaneous in her spending, except maybe in her racehorses. But even though she's worth quote unquote billions, she, for instance, wasn't allowed to, in the end, fully enjoy her famous Royal Britannia yacht, and she had to give it up because there was lots of issues, with people complaining about subsidizing the royal family. And so she had to give up her yacht, and that was one of the few times that she's ever been recorded crying, if you recall.
Mm. So I'm hearing, what I think I'm hearing you say is that the issue of wealth is tricky.
Yes.
Relative.
Yeah, it's relative, and there's many different types because you have to look at, obviously, if you're born into it, then there is the self-made person. There's the quote unquote chancer, the people who do, I don't know, a scam, or not necessarily a scam, but people do these like get rich, oh, let's make an app of this. And then sometimes it can take off, that 1 in a million that can take off. They're so slow and steady people, it's sort of like a dying breed, literally. But, there's people who, and honestly, I don't know if it's a generational thing or it's based on the politics, but it's very rare you see someone who will get a job and then become a manager, right? And then they become the director, right? You know what I mean? And then they buy a two-bedroom house and a three-bedroom house. It seems like wealth, it's very hard to have a linear ladder of wealth. It seems like, it's almost like a drought and then all of a sudden a burst. And I'm sure this sort of resonates with a lot of people, because it's like you have nothing and maybe you inherited from, I don't know, your parents or an aunt or an uncle or something like that. Or, all of a sudden, you have a jackpot of whatever, it may be. And of course, if you look, especially in generations, there's always that one industry that makes a lot of money, right? So for instance, in the 70s, 80s, it was oil. Like it was all about the oil barons, right? Then it was, fashion. Although fashion it seems to still be a big seller, and that's another talk show. But, fashion still seems to make money, because if you look at the Spanish billionaires, it's the Zara family, okay? And Zara is known for fast fashion, right? There is the tech, the San Francisco tech boom, right? So there's the whole there. Cryptocurrency is another one. So my point is, you also have to look at the timing of things, because it does seem very cyclical, even though, people just once again go, oh, wealthy. Because now I see people who are in the oil industry, and they almost seem like fuddy-duddies. Everyone wants to be in some sort of hedge fund, or, now the latest obviously is the AI boom, right? So it depends on, if you're going to catch that wave and have the premonition to foresee that wave. It seems like that is the only sort of way to capture it if you're not really born into a wealthy family and you're not a trust fund kid, because now the job market is such that linear progression, as we've seen in the past, let's just say 10, 15 years, it's really diminished. Yeah. And it's funny how, this Neptune cycle from, for instance, when Neptune was last in Pisces, 150 years, like 50 years ago, thereabouts. And we're kind of seeing the same things in the sense that, for instance, when Neptune was still desperately like in the thick of Pisces, there was money just seemed weird. And as we know, Mercury debilitates in Pisces, right? But it was like inflation has gone through the roof. People are just printing money, and things were just like selling for $1 billion. And it's like, well, how does a chocolate shop sell for, a chain of chocolate shops sell for $1 billion? Right now, the latest news was there was a hair salon chain in Korea that sold for $800 million. So my point is, nothing's sort of making sense,
So there's a number of things that come to mind. The first, as you were describing it, made me think about, that image of Fortuna, the Wheel of Fortune, coming round, as this is the stuff of Middle Age philosophy from the Middle Ages, and prior to that, this notion.
Yes.
And there's an element of fate in it all, if you take that particular point of view.
Yes.
First thought, thinking about it, and maybe I should ask you whether you've looked at the part of fortune in this context.
Yes, I have. It's funny because, when obviously, especially when, you meet up at the lodge and afterwards we go to the pub and we have, discussions and things, we will share notes, won't we? We'll be like, well, what are you seeing in your readings and in your experience? And of course, the part of fortune rather, it is symptomatic of fortune, right? But ironically, this part of fortune kind of mirrors back to the 8 types of Lakshmi. Because for instance, I'll tell you the 8 types of Lakshmi. There is just general bounty Lakshmi. There's Lakshmi, the wealth of power and strength. There's the wealth of food and harvest. That means like, someone who's a bon vivant, and they just really eat well, and they live the good life. Like for instance, not being stereotypical, but it seems like certain countries, like let's just say Italy, there is that term in itself, la dolce vita, right? Which means you live well. So even if you live moderately well, they'll eat well. Whereas you see certain cultures and food is almost a byproduct, and they're just like, no, we have to be in this rat race. We need more money for more security. Do you know what I mean? There's that sort of thing. So if you have a good, as they call it, Danya, Lakshmi, that food and harvest, there's that. Then there's just Dana Lakshmi, which means money. You know, hardcore, like, yes, you have wealth. You have lovely houses, you know, wealth. Then there is Vira Lakshmi, which is, do you have strength and courage and power? Because some people, you know, we can always name these people. They may not necessarily be that wealthy, but they seem to have a lot of control and influence over people. You know, it's almost like in simple terms, you see an Instagram influencer who can make cookies sell out, you know, within, I don't know, hours. But could Warren Buffett necessarily have that same influence? No. Even though Warren Buffett, you know, might have to employ, I don't know, one of his TV stations that he owns and has shares in an influence, but he can't actually say, hey, these cookies are good. You know, it doesn't, some people just don't have that. So that actually is a type of wealth, you know, when you have influence, right? There's also the Lakshmi of Vidya, which means learning, of knowledge, you know, someone who's really smart and can use that knowledge as their fortune. You know, it's almost like street smarts as their wealth. And then there's victory, Vijaya Lakshmi. So for instance, people who have that would be, let's just say, lawyers or, you know, athletes, people who actually need to win to actually gain money. So, but it's funny because, like, I'll give you an example. There is a real famous, consistently known poker player, because the average person will look at a poker player and say, oh, but you need to be lucky, right? But professionals will say, no, that you can be lucky once. You might be able to beat me once, but if we play poker 100 times, I'm going to beat you 99% of the time, right? That's the professional poker player's thing. So there's this guy called Phil Ivey. And he's been a poker player for ages, and in that world he's known. And ironically, he has an exalted Venus, which also, you know, it's a planet conferring luxury, wealth, right? It just, I mean, as a simplistic thing, if you want to say. But still, ironically, he's got a Venus at 29 degrees Pisces, which is just 2 degrees off its maximum, you know, exaltation. And he's got a mutual reception with Jupiter, which is another, you know, planet of bounty, right? So he's got a mutual reception, which almost magnifies it, as we know, you know, for those who follow those kind of rules. And it's in the 5th house. So that exalted Venus with the mutual reception is in the 5th house, which makes his poker playing amazing. And in his 3rd house, he's got an exalted Mars. And how do you play poker? With your hands. 3rd house denotes, you know, the natural sign significator of hands. And sometimes I think, God, this is so, you know, linear and so obvious. Like, you don't even have to be an accomplished astrologer to see his chart and be like, oh, wow, you know. So I just find things like that kind of funny. But his part of fortune, funny enough, was in the 8th house. So, I mean, 8th house for a poker player, is it the fact that he can see the unseen? Is it he can see the moods, the 8th house, what's not obvious? And maybe does that complement his exalted Mars and his, you know, Venus and Jupiter in mutual reception? And that combined has made him a perennial champion in poker, for instance.
And what sign is the part of fortune in? Do you recall?
Yes, it is in the 8th house in Leo.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. You know, well, there's another chart. It's funny though, because, you know, the part of fortune is an easy one to go for. But one thing that I found really interesting, because, you know, I've kind of gone through, you know, going through this a lot, because when I studied my Vedic. I mean, I studied both tropical and Vedic, but with Vedic, it was more sort of formal in a school, and I studied with Pandit Sanjay Bath for 5 years. And so, of course, you know, every year, it was emphasis half the time was on wealth, right? Just because, once again, it's so important right now. And, you know, when you're sort of year 1, year 2, and you look at malefics, or you look at malefics together, like the Saturn Mars, you go, oh dear, that's not good, you know, and you worry, right, quietly, and you go, oh, that can't be good. but I tell you, there has been, I'll just give you examples. Howard Hughes, who was at that time one of the first billionaires, that the world has known, he had Saturn Mars occultation, which is, when Saturn and Mars are in the exact same degree out of the whole 360-degree chart. So if I gave the average astrologer, right, that chart, they'd be like, oh, that can't be good. I mean, don't get me wrong. It manifested in other ways, but in terms of wealth, if anything, it made it bigger. Warren Buffett, he's another one. He has a Saturn-Mars opposition, right? And I mean, we know that he's got, I don't know how many hundreds of billions he has. Queen Elizabeth had a Saturn-Mars mutual reception, right? Mark Zuckerberg, also, once again, Saturn-Mars conjunction. So my point is, when you're looking at money, of course, we can look at the part of fortune and the second, Lord, and the second house, fifth house, etc. But you have to be careful about generalizing malefics when it comes to money.
I would have thought so, because the fact of the matter is, if we think about the examples you gave of Mars and Saturn, whether they be in opposition or in a more collaborative state, I would think that, let's put it this way, they might be egging each other on in terms of anxiety and fear, and consequently create the drive to generate wealth as a means of security and control. So I think it goes back to what you said about the relative nature, because I think when you're talking about the different types of wealth, I think really another way of framing this is to say that these are different types of drives. And so whatever we prioritize is where we're going to put our energy.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're right, the egging each other on is actually a very apt phrasing, because another thing I've seen about this Saturn Mars, I guess because they are malefic, they do have the drive, i.e., it's not like they are just standing back. And even like with the Queen, who had the Saturn Mars, if you think about it, considering her power and her wealth, she was quite austere. I mean, apart from her racehorses, which seemed to be her only sort of, decadent expenditure, but even then, apparently, she made money through it. Ironically, do you know what I mean? So it wasn't she was just spending money. She was so good at breeding these racehorses that she loved training and putting in competitions. But in the end, I mean, I think her fillies were one of the biggest. She had one of the biggest stud farms the last 20-30 years of her life, which is interesting. So you're right about this drive, because it's funny because Queen Elizabeth segues many things. I mean, mind you, she's one of a kind, obviously, literally and symbolically. She's, the queen, the longest reigning queen, etc. But she's almost has elements of being a self-made person, that drive. But then she was also a literal trust fund child, right? Because, her family estate, as we know, I mean, funny enough, people think the wealth came from, 1,000 years ago from William the Conqueror. But I'm sure many historians will correct that and say, actually, it was Queen Victoria who started the family being wealthy. Before that, they didn't have very much money. And they were really at the behest of Parliament, etc. And it was Queen Victoria who changed that and, invested, etc. So Queen Elizabeth has segments of both. But I looked at Michael Carroll's chart. Do you remember him? He was the first very famous national lottery winner in the United Kingdom after it started. He was a very famous guy who said he was the king of chavs, and he won 10 million pounds back in 2002. And 10 million pounds in 2002, especially with the inflation recently, it was literally like some people say it's about 50 to 60 million, the equivalent of that. You know what, the house you could buy, and the, the butter you could buy as well. Okay. I'm being facetious, but yeah. And he went at quite a young age. And what's really, really interesting is that he started off apparently being a binman, and, like a part-time binman. And I don't know if many people know this. I'm sure it's because it seems like it's lore now. He lost all that money, and he's back to being a binman.
Yes, the Wheel of Fortune again, isn't it?
I mean, he apparently he's full-time binman now. He has said he has no regrets because he lived it up, and he said he had a fantastic time. But there was always drama because I think on his estate, which he did have an estate, he had one of those kind of races, with those kind of half tractor, half motorcycles. And apparently there was lots of issues, and his neighbors were always like, complaining, and he couldn't ever really enjoy his house, he said, in one of his many interviews. But I'll tell you what he had. He had K2, which is a south node, and Neptune occulted, okay, of the same degree in Sagittarius, both ways, both tropically and sidereally. And K2, the south node, is about the past, right? Past life, what you bring from the past life. And Neptune is about dreams. So, if you want to look at it very sort of, psychologically, it's almost like this is a dream come true from a past life, almost, right? Because it is a bit weird, isn't it? It's like he has this extraordinary wealth, and then now he had this extraordinary wealth that left. I mean, it's almost hard to spend that kind of money, but he managed to. He also has a lot of things together, like Jupiter Uranus, so the sudden wealth, the Jupiter Uranus conjunction, and he also has a Saturn Pluto conjunction. So I don't know if Pluto was like actually, that Saturnian built up thing, it's just gonna dissolve it. I mean, we can say whatever you like on that kind of thing, but yeah, I because it's such an unusual story. So yeah, I noticed as well when I was looking at people who got sudden wealth, like lottery winners, there was a strong South Node signature and a Neptune signature.
That's very interesting.
Yes. It's funny because did you hear the latest news about Niemeyer, the Brazilian soccer player, who? Okay, so the last 3 days. Niemeyer got out of the blue about 750 million euros from a Brazilian billionaire who died and left. He was such a fan of Niemeyer, they had never met before, and he left that much in his will to Niemeyer. And I looked at the chart because I was like, I have to see it. And once again, it's the malefics. He had, on the day he received it, Mars square his natal Mars in the 11th house. So Mars was transiting his 11th house, square his natal Mars in the second to the degree, and Jupiter was opposite his natal Mars to the degree, which means it was also square transiting Mars. So, when people are scared of a malefic square, well, don't be.
That is pretty outrageous, actually.
Yeah, and he has 5 planets. Niemeyer has 5 planets in his second house. So, he has a lot of, obviously energy there.
Yeah.
He has Uranus there, Neptune there, Mars there. I mean, it's...
And that comes to my next question, I guess, which was, what are you seeing going on with the second house? And, it's funny, isn't it? Because when I have clients with the sun in the second house, the issue of money, it's not so much that they have money, and it's not so much that they want money. It's that they can only value themselves if they have money. And that's a very tough thing to live with. And it's making me think about what you were talking about. These are supposedly malefic transits that this player has going on when he inherits this extraordinary amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
Because money is, if we think of money as being water,
Mm.
that makes a lot of sense, because the way that that water moves, can you hold on to it? Can you contain it? Will there be leaks? Can you be flooded? So it's, I guess what I'm saying is that the reason we find money tricky is because it's almost like it's an energy in its own right, and it's how we engage with it. So you win the lottery, what are you going to do with that? How are you, what are you going to do with it? And equally, in this case, he inherits this extraordinary amount of money. What's he going to do with it? How is he going to hold on to it? Can he manage it? Can
Mm.
he control it? Or is it going to be drained away? Is it going to leak in all sorts of different directions as people challenge his right to it, or
Mm-hmm.
want some of it? What's going
Mm-hmm.
to, and what does that mean for him? So these are all questions. And, you know, I think many people would love to be in that kind of dilemma, because their dilemma is the opposite,
Yeah.
where it doesn't matter how hard they work, it's just not there.
You know, first of all, I know that this is a very common statistic that many people know, but 70%, just like Michael Carroll, who we just spoke about, the king of chavs, they lose it. So it's almost like irrespective of how much they have, it's gone. Okay. But it's so interesting that you said, because sometimes you go out and then you go back in and simplify it. It's so true, because water, as you said, it flows. Are there leaks? It can, and the thing about water is it can steam, right? It can simmer, and it can also freeze,
And
which means,
evaporate.
yeah, but also you have this lump of ice, which is technically water, but you can't access it, right? Whether it's like, let's just say a trust fund like Queen Elizabeth, where she has all this money, but the people are like baying at her if she goes on that yacht one more time. Or let's just say, like you said, there could be a court case against and contest the will. So he has this money frozen in time almost, can actually drink from it, can eat, right? Or get a lovely steam for your skin and have a nice facial. I mean, there's no way you can enjoy it. And it's very, yes, I think, and this is about the agency, kind of loops back to the agency, isn't it? It's like, well, do you have water that's room temperature in your favorite mug, right? Or favorite cup, where you can sip from it and quench your thirst? Or, right? It's that kind of simple thing. Because I remember my mom, there was this one person who had, when I was growing up, had this most beautiful wedding. They came from a very wealthy family. And it was just, from a 12-year-old, thing, I was just like, wow, that must be amazing. And my mom said, do you know what? Normal's actually the best. Because normal, it's just like, you want enough and you enjoy wanting it, but you have enough, so you're not starving. And as I get older, philosophically, I do see that, because I wonder if also there's a zero-sum game element to it, because especially, let's just, for instance, look at the lots, right? We have a lot of fortune, but there are other lots out there, right? So no one is spared. And especially the older we get, we see just the news, for instance, but we also see people in real life. It seems like everyone has a lot of fortune. So whether it's, you have a great health, or you have, great family or great children, or what a great career, there's also that one thing that's hugely lacking. If we're lucky, it's one. You know what I mean? If we're lucky. But you know what I mean? So this also kind of comes to rise other things. Because, for instance, I don't know if you remember last year, there was that very famous or infamous Ambani wedding, where the Indian billionaire spent, I think it was like 600 to 800 million on a wedding.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now that son, who he had that thing, and ironically, he really spoiled that son more. Apparently, the other siblings didn't get mind you, don't feel sorry for them. I still think they got several hundred million spent on their wedding. But this son, they spent more because apparently he has health issues. And no amount of money is helping him with his health issues. And if you saw, he was quite morbidly obese, not just, you could tell there was health. It wasn't like he had just overindulged. It was something beyond his control. And the best fat farm in America or Switzerland isn't helping with this. So that's my point. Like there's this blessing where he is married to a lovely girl and has, quote unquote, an enviable wedding. But there's this crutch, and even the parents are trying to throw a few extra 100 million, as his favorite child that they feel so sorry for. So every time you see something like that, it kind of segues back to, what you have to value again, right? It's like moderation. I don't know. What do you think?
It's hard because it's easier to grasp this when we're talking about there being an abundance of the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But for people who do not have it,
yeah,
much harder to be philosophical because there's a survival element that comes into it.
Yes.
And so where are you when you're looking at it from that perspective?
Well, okay, so Warren Buffett has a second house, going to the second house and what we value, it's our home, right? It's that water. It's like the moon exalts in the second house, right? In the natural house of Taurus. Now, Warren Buffett, even though he is one of the richest men and has been for decades, he is renowned for not buying a private plane because he said, I'll just smooch on my other billionaire friends. I don't want to spend the money, right? And I thought, okay, that's kind of tongue-in-cheek, fine, But he's also famous for living, when he's in Omaha, Nebraska, where the HQ of his company is, living in the same house. And apparently it's, even now with inflation, it's still not worth $1 million, apparently. Okay. So, and I'm not saying he lives like that all the time, but just even if it's symbolic, the very fact that he's like, no, this is my symbolic house. I'm going to live in the same 3-bedroom little corner, wooden house in Omaha. That's saying something. And he has got a retrograde Saturn in his second house. So there's a malefic, then there's a retrograde, right? What I've noticed about retrograde Saturns in the second house, because Warren Buffett wasn't born a billionaire. Another person with a Saturn retrograde is J.K. Rowling in the second house. So she's another person who was not born from a wealthy family. And you'd think, oh, it's a malefic, but it's that retrograde. And she rose, herself. So the retrograde, the malefic can denote being careful, but someone who maybe could be very wealthy, especially if it's in their own sign, because in both cases, it's in their own sign. It's domicile, right? So there is strength there. And in Vedic astrology, believe it or not, because I know in Hellenistic, retrogrades go down quite a bit in the qualitative nature when you appraise it. Depending on the schools of thought in Vedic, that also applies. However, there is also a dictum that says that the retrograde, it's a past life want, it's a past life thing that's not finished, hence it's retrograde in your present birth chart. And so it's something that you're really going to strive for more. So wherever you have, let's just say, a retrograde in the second, or the second house has a retrograde, it's almost like a huff and a puff from the past life is how the Vedic astrologers would view it. So for instance, Warren Buffett may be in a past life, and same with J.K. Rowling. It's like they were going to work next life, they're going to be rich, right? They were going to succeed financially. And it's like, yes, I finally made it. It has that sort of energy to it when you appraise it from a Vedic sidereal standpoint. Queen Elizabeth also had a malefic in her second house. Own sign, however, there was still that issue. She may have been born wealthy, but maybe that malefic is the lack of perfect agency, i.e. she's not just another wealthy housewife who can buy whatever she wants. The worst is gossip. With her, it was actual restraint from government. So with the second house, the rule in Vedic astrology, and I've seen it over and over again, second house, yes, but if it's empty, you always look at the Lord and you look at the aspects, which, I mean, technically you do that anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just shift the focus slightly.
Yeah.
Because maybe what I was getting at with my previous question is a matter of earning power.
Yeah.
So we can look at it as an element. There's an element of fate, perhaps, if the wheel of fortune. And but some people have earning power.
Yes.
And some people don't. And maybe this comes back to your matter of influence. And I don't mean necessarily that some people go into the professions and they make money because they're in the professions, or they go into business. And it seems that, it's all about that earning power. And I'm trying to think of how else I can put it, but I can't put.
Well, no, because see, it's that classic thing there, right? So it's like, are you going to make the money, or are you a trust fund kid, or did you just marry well, for instance? Because those I've seen, like, if you look at a lot of the royal families chart, because I went through, especially the UK, I went through Nicholas Campion's book and sort of went through it. If you look, they have a very strong 8th house, which means other people's money, right? Yes. Are they cutting ribbons? Yes. Are they shaking hands? Yes. Are they making, polite conversations when they, open a hospital wing or an airport? Sure. But let's be honest, that's not, that grueling, okay? Because they also get to go home, easily and rest, okay? So, but it's an 8th house, other people's money, because ultimately they live through their investments, which is the 8th house, right? Very 8th house. And it's also, the government also does give them a stipend every year, right? There's a allowance. So the second house, it's not that, while it's important, I also think it's a mental viewpoint, because the second house is also the mind, right? How do you approach it? Because I've seen quite a few charts, especially because I live in London, where they have a very strong second house, okay? And guess what? It confirms that they make a lot of money, okay? They're either a high-profile lawyer or a banker. They have a lot of earning power. But are they wealthy? Not really. Do you know what metric I go by? Could they live next 3 months and maintain their lifestyle if they lost their job? No. Because you also have to look at their 12th house of expenses, right? Because the people that I know, that especially who work in let's just say in an office, they're high profile office workers, okay? The problem is they have high profile expenses. So their mortgage isn't 1,000, their mortgage is thousands. Then they have the kids' educations, which, as everyone knows in the UK, is neighing on 18,000, 30,000 pounds a year. So even if they make 200,000, 300,000 pounds, which is an extraordinary amount of money, don't get me wrong. In London, if you have a few kids going to private school, they have to budget for their holidays. It's not like you think, like, when you do other people's math and accountancy, you think, oh, 300,000, you can go here, there. And they're like, no, I can't. I can only go on 2 holidays a year. We have to stay, in England, the other 2 holidays, because we can't afford it after all my bills. So my point once again is, there's the exterior view when you go, oh, it must be really nice. And, oh, you must be just milking it and life is easy. But meanwhile, that banker is going, okay, so I paid for this. I paid for the alimony. Okay. And you know what I mean? They're constantly having to proportion. So second house, while earning power is good, it's like you said, can you hold it? What other expenses do you have? Because there's some people that I see who are single, and let's just say they live in a small studio, but it's paid off. Materially, mind-based, they probably live like a wealthier person because money's not on their mind. They're not worried about money. I mean, but prima facie, they're living in, like, let's just say, zone 5 in London, and you think, oh, well, you can't be that wealthy, but they're not panicking about money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's that state of mind. Now, I want to take you back to the eighth house because it's
Yes.
the eighth house plays a very important part here.
Yes.
And obviously we know it's about other people's money.
Yeah.
So are you saying that a strong eighth house is good, or I try to not use these words, but is indicative of the potential to have wealth, but through the agency of others?
Yes. 100%. And people with strong eighth houses can marry well. I've seen a lot of girls and men, but I don't know as many men. And this is my personal, thing now, because let's be honest, not everyone has their charts up on the public view. And also even if you have you don't have the time, because I did look at, for instance, Lauren Sanchez's chart, but she didn't have the time. So I couldn't find out, about the eighth house. But you'll find a lot of people with a strong eighth house who marry well, and there you go, they married into other people's money. In Vedic astrology, funny enough, eighth house is also your in-laws. So that would mean, like, let's just say, do your in-laws have the money to spare on you? So will they give it to their son or daughter, and then you'll be able to benefit off that, right? But for instance, I'll give you another metric of the part of fortune, the ascendant lord, and actually the 11th lord for gains as well. I also, funny enough, more than second house, I look at 11th house after I look at the second house, because it seems like, have you actually gained from it though? Yeah, right? Like, has it brought you luck? So for instance, there's this guy called, I don't know if you've heard of him. He was a early quote unquote adopter of the Bitcoin cryptocurrency. And he started this marketplace where people could buy and sell. I mean, half of it was drugs, but nevertheless. And he then had just came out of a 12-year sentence. Okay, 12-year sentence. But when he came out, people were saying he didn't have access to his Bitcoin. So now people are saying he's probably a billionaire because he didn't have access to his Bitcoin to even sell. His ascendant lord is Pisces, and it's debilitated in Capricorn. So he had to go through that debilitation, or in fall, of going to prison for 12 years, which is funny because Jupiter, there's also a 12-year cycle, right? And he got out when Jupiter was transiting his first house, okay? But his gain was through a price. So that Jupiter in Capricorn was like, I'll give you money, but you're going to have to suffer for it, right? His eighth lord is exalted, Venus, almost to the degree of maximum exaltation. And guess what? People were like, I don't care, because he could have lost his access to the Bitcoin. So they were like, he's done so much for the community and he took the fall for us. So when he left, lots of people fundraised and raised $31 million for him when he left prison.
So in addition to potentially the money that is waiting for him,
Yes.
people also gave him money.
Yes. Yes.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And, he's got an exalted, it's funny. He's in an extreme case. He's got a debilitated Jupiter in the 11th, but he's got an exalted sun in the 2nd, which helps, right? And he's got that Venus exalted, and, so it works. Isn't it funny how the exaltations play out, the debilitations play out, but it doesn't cancel out the wealth. It's just that there's a little cost to it.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I love it. And I think that anyone who is coming in to your talk on the 13th of October at 7 p.m., the Astrological Lodge of London is going to be in for an absolute treat.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
You all that I'll be putting a link to that in the description box.
Right.
Do make your way there. I'm sure that your time will be very well spent with Naomi's company. Thank you so much, Naomi.
Thank you, Anna. It was a pleasure.
If people want to find you, how do they do that?
Oh, I think my email is on the lodge's website, actually, because I don't have a proper thing. It's only word of mouth, and yeah, so I should get one in social media, but I haven't done it. So.
Well, that's brilliant. Thank you very, very much.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you all for watching. Now, do remember that in the description box, you will also find links to my own website and Substack. And if you are interested in learning about astrology, do check out the courses that I am also running. Until next time, goodbye.
Goodbye.